and sort of marrying that with open source is a hard challenge sometimes. So effectively, what I'm going to try and convince you today is that you can actually be increasing your productivity by coding less. You can instill trust in your product by just exposing all of your flaws and being completely naked about what's wrong with your product. And then also you can increase your adoption and market penetration by giving clients the freedom to leave, so they're not locked into your product. So just quickly, we're going to introduce QuantConnect, what our company is, and the Lean open source project. We're going to solve these 3 key problems that QuantConnect encountered, and I'm going to give you some examples about how we encountered them and how we worked through them. And as a startup, we come at this from a very different angle to most of the other speeches here. We're not Red Hat. We've got a very different approach, and we're fighting against those much larger competitors. So it's a fairly scrappy presentation, and I hope you enjoy it. So before we dive into the details, we were founded about 2012. And so back then, open source and FINOS and none of this had really taken shape yet. So algorithms were state secrets. You couldn't talk about them. You couldn't share them. They were arguably some of the highest value software that a bank or a trading fund makes, because it's code which makes money. You write this code, you put it into the financial markets, and it directly converts and makes trades and makes money. So banks put a lot of investment into them, and a lot of investment into protecting them and keeping them secret and keeping them locked away and safe. It's also incredibly difficult technology. So you're working with the bleeding edge of tech, maths, modeling, pulling in AI, and you need it to be incredibly stable and have incredibly high uptimes. So it's a very, very complex and difficult technology to build. And so that's why they spend so much money in trying to protect it and trying to build it. Some really cool examples. I'm not sure how familiar you are with the algorithmic trading space, but we've got Jump, or supposedly Jump Capital in Chicago, building massive long-range radio wave antennas in the middle of fields in Chicago. And then they have receivers over here in Scotland. And apparently they can shave about 5 milliseconds by having a long-range radio connection direct for themselves. And these connections, they can only do 5 or 10 kilobits of data, but they're very, very low latency. So there's massive investments in the space, and it's really, really fascinating to see what these proprietary trading funds are doing. So the kind of protections that people have seen, they've got all these very tight legal agreements and sort of gardening and non-compete clauses. And as soon as 2009, there was a guy named Sergey Alinikov who was charged by Goldman Sachs for IP appropriation for theft. And he was using GitHub. He was just using GitHub, and because the server was not inside the Goldman network, they thought he was stealing code. And so there was a 10-year legal battle with this this engineer who was committing his code to a repository, and he's still fighting them, trying to clear his name. So there's some really interesting law that's happening, and the banks are slowly opening up and coming to terms with what open source is and how they can use it. But there's still a lot of work to be done. In the same way, there's also very expensive financial data, so there's no way for individuals to really be able to buy this data and do it themselves. Yeah. So QuantConnect was born in this era, and we believe that this sort of technology and financial data should be made available to everyone. So we provide engineers, mathematicians, scientists, anyone who wants free financial data. We've got about 400 terabytes of equities and options, futures, FX data. that we host in a web-based coding environment. So people can actually log into our website for free. There's an IDE there with autocomplete and debugging, and you can just go ahead and code an algorithm in the web browser and then run a simulation on historical financial data. So we've got some manifesto stuff there. You guys can check that out later, but yeah. This is our core product. So this is the simulation result, and the coding environment's up there on the top left. So you can open Python or C# files and write algorithms. We actually run this in AWS. We have a cluster up there, and we provide all that for free to the users. So this is all powered by our open source product called Lean. Lean is the core of the platform, and we have a continuous deployment system, so every single commit that gets merged into master in GitHub is available on our website within about 10 minutes. So it's really bleeding edge, and we have a lot of fun with that one. But today there's about 65,000 quants on the platform who have made about 1 million algorithms, and they've done a lot of live trading. So we've got a hybrid of cloud and colo infrastructure for our live trading. Globally, the community spans about 25% in Europe and about 55% in US. The US is just much more of a quantitative market right now, but the communities are spread out all over the world. One of the fascinating things from running an open source quant platform, we were interviewing a prospective team member the other day, and he worked for one of the major quant funds, and he was telling me that at their fund, they use the Lean open source project as a reference because they don't, if they need to build something new internally, they'll go to Lean, they'll look up how we did it, and they'll decide how they want to architect their own code base after that. So you have a chance to do a little bit of thought leadership in the space and define the right way to solve some of these problems. So we're a small team. We're 8 now. None of us have a finance background, and we all just had a passion for the markets, and we're kind of all computer geeks, and we're all happiest with headphones on and not talking to anyone. And we just signed a lease in Seattle. So we've got a 4,000 square foot space there now, and we're looking to grow to about 20, 30 people over the next couple of years. So it should be an interesting couple of years. However, it hasn't always been so rosy and great. We were always fighting against much larger and much better funded competition. And so I tried to make all of these problems that we're going to talk about generic business problems. So it's a classic problem that you've got competition, and most of the time they're better funded than you, and you've got to try and compete effectively against them. So whether it was the banks, the hedge funds, legacy platforms that did algorithmic trading, or even other startups were much better funded than we were. So we were trying to figure out ways that we could compete and remain relevant. Some of you might know the industry, but there's some startups up here that received well over $100 million in funding, and we were able to compete with less than $1 million, mostly bootstrapping on organic community word of mouth. So that kind of started with a very closed-sourced and humble beginning. We were located in Chile, in South America. We won a grant from the Chilean government called Startup Chile, and that was in 2012. And we had spent a lot of time and energy building equity algorithmic trading into the platform. And then by 2014, we still had equities, but we were broke. And so at that point, we had about 2,000 users and about 4 paying clients. But 2 of those paying clients were family members, so we can't count them. So effectively, at this point, we were thinking, what are we doing this for? We're hardworking engineers. We need to have an audience of people who care about what we're doing, or we should, rethink what we're doing. And our main competitor at that point had $7 million in funding. So for us, it was like a David and Goliath story. But it wasn't all bad. We were working out of this space that we affectionately called the cupboard. It was a house in Chile, but it was the back cupboard. It was a storage cupboard in that house. It was an 8x4 little concrete block, and it was really great in the summer, nice and cool and quiet. And we were able to steal Wi-Fi from the neighbors with our little reflector dish that we made up. So yeah, it was just very cheap rent, and that's kind of where we were building the company. And open 24/7, because you have to work all night, so it needs to be open. At that point, we were thinking about open sourcing, and we sort of went through the same emotional fears that every business or closed source company goes through, I imagine. You're worried that your competitors will look at your code and try and take away any competitive advantage that you have. We were worried that people would use the open source platform and then just never come back to QuantConnect and leave us for good. And then we were worried about people seeing all of our glaring errors and failures in broad daylight. So actually, the only reason that was really strong for us was that the majority of people are a little bit lazy, that people will pay for convenience. And so even if we open sourced everything, not everybody wants to spend the time and energy to go to an open source project, download it, set it up, configure all the settings and the servers that they needed. So on the basis of that, we made the bet that our value as a company wasn't on the code that we were offering. It was on the ease of use, about how to use that code and making it as easy as possible. We invested a lot in the data that we provided to the community and the servers that the live algorithms were running on. And so those were also competitive advantages that we thought that just anyone going to the open source project wouldn't be able to replicate that easily. So in June 2014, we figured, what do we have to lose? Let's do this. And we set out on a mission to find the 100. And so the 100 was going to be 100 people who would pay at least $10 a month. Just if we couldn't find 100 people who cared enough to pay $10 a month, we needed to go and get day jobs, go back to normal life. And if we did find those 100, we would open source the project. That was the deal we made with the community at the time. So on the crowdfunding campaign on day one, we reached 12 people, which was effectively doubling our revenue. So we were over the moon. We were celebrating a lot that day. And then this was after the crowdfunding. That's an actual team photo of us. And of course, with 100 people paying $10 a month, that effectively meant that we could buy better ramen noodles. But we still had proven and we had got the validation of the community that we were looking for. And yeah, we open sourced it. And effectively after that point, we had this enormous feature explosion that was fueled by the open source. So 2014, 2015, we added live trading support. So previous to that, it was just a backtesting and simulation platform. In 2015, we added foreign exchange algorithmic trading, so you can do algorithm design on Forex. And then just one after the other, there was CFDs and futures and options algorithms. And those are really hard. Doing algorithmic trading on futures and options is a very hard problem. And when we announced that feature, we had hedge funds ring up and say, hey, we don't even have that. How do you do this? Let us get your open source project. So that was really nice validation. And then that kind of peaked in 2017. we started to get just 100% community-driven massive blocks of code submitted to the open source project. So it's continuing, but I mean, the first one was 2017. We had a contribution of GDAX crypto brokerage to the platform, and that was just a 100% community-driven initiative, which was really exciting. So I'll go into more detail about that later, but I'll just skip ahead to problem number 2. So generic business problem number 2 is that algorithmic trading is difficult, and it's a very error-prone technology. So I'm sure if you're building any sort of product that's difficult, you've got bugs and issues with it, and it's important to get it right. As a business, you don't want instability, you don't want bugs for your clients, and with algorithmic trading, it's amplified times 100 times. People, when they run a simulation, if it doesn't give them exactly what they think, they'll blame the platform. They'll think there's something wrong with the code rather than the algorithm that they're making. So imagine if you're running a hedge fund with $20 million in it and the algorithm isn't doing what you think it should be doing, you're paranoid, and you absolutely need to know that the code is running and is doing what it should be doing. So it's a particularly sensitive problem. Some of these in the last few years you might be familiar with. So 2010 was the famous flash crash, and that was just some quant spoofing orders and faking the market, causing that one. A more applicable one is maybe Knight Capital. So 2012, Knight Capital had a simple coding bug in their algorithm where they would buy at market and then sell at market and buy back at the bid price over and over and over again, thousands of times a minute. And they lost $460 million in just a matter of 45 minutes. And then recently, relatively recently, 2013, there was Associated Press, Twitter was hacked. And there was a tweet that went out saying that Obama was hurt in an explosion in the White House. And all of these robots panicked and sold. And the market dipped about a point within a few minutes, percent within a few minutes. So it's very high impact technology. And the Associated Press one was quoted at $140 billion in a few minutes, disappeared because of a tweet. So it's very important to get robust testing in and to know what your algorithm is doing. So one thing that we found through working with the open source project closely, we benefited from a massive army of community reviewers. In our project, we've got about 80 engineers who are contributing at the moment, and thousands more who just watch and consume the project. And when something goes wrong, they let you know really fast. It's really great because we have thousands of unit tests and regression tests, and every time there's a new commit, we rerun all of these tests, and we still miss it. Still, today, we've got hundreds of algorithms going through regression, and users are the ones who pick up the bugs because there's these weird edge cases that they've built into their algorithms, and it's very hard to track. So we've set up community chat rooms, and it's a fairly standard feature of open source these days. You've got a chat room for the community where you can chat with them, you get instant feedback, and then when a commit goes through and something in their algorithm changes, they ping the public all channel and let you know really, really fast. So that's been really great. Essentially, through open sourcing that code, it gives people confidence in the code base. Even though 99% of people won't be reading all of the code, knowing that it's there and knowing that they can go and view the pending issues, knowing that other people are reviewing the code base gives people a lot of confidence that they can trust the software. One second feature that we find from the project being open source now is the ability of the users to communicate and have a say in the direction of the project. there's nothing more public than a GitHub issues list. When people post there and it spams everyone who's watching the project, it's a really great way to get your issue heard. And people know that, and they use it. And they get their issue heard, and we discuss, and when it's appropriate, you know, the community can move on it. So a second thing that's come out of it, what we've found is that creative and smart people love hard problems. And algorithmic trading in our platform is a really, really hard problem. And so it attracts a lot of very bright minds who have enjoyed contributing to the project to solve some of those hard problems. So it means that we're working day in, day out with some very, very talented people, and it's a real luxury that we appreciate. And we've been able to recruit most of the team through the open source project. So it's a great ground to find people who love your project and would love to work in it day to day. And you can quickly see who is a good engineer and who isn't. People write great code, they can make great contributions, and you just reach out to them, and we've been able to recruit a bunch of them into the company. It's also a way that we've been able to build an audience. So what I was saying before about the 100, without that audience, it doesn't really matter what you do. But with open source, you're able to quickly get an audience of people who care about your project and are following it and watching it, and have a vested interest in seeing it succeed. And many times we've actually heard back from hedge funds that it's much better than what they've got internally. So they might be working with Excel or R and sort of hacking together models like that. But what we can build and offer them through the open source project is sort of light years evolved from what they're used to. So the third problem that we found was that with 65,000 engineers and all the different hedge funds and trading funds that are using it, by definition, they've all got different ideas. So they've all got different ways that they think that they can make money, different algorithms that they would like to deploy into the market. And each one is so different that it's very hard for us to define a standard interface for them to build to. So, excuse me, we've needed to define ways to work with the community where they can evolve and be as complex as they need without actually changing the core of the project. So this is a standard open source problem. You've got thousands of people who want their feature built, but you've got some common feature to the core of the project, and it might not apply to everyone. And building in every single feature that everybody wants is impossible. So what we've found, so just as an example, I went through before the presentation and tried to find all of the different plugin points in the engine, and I stopped when I filled up the slide. But so with FINOS, there's just so many different variables and plugins that you need to think of. So slippage models, how the filling price moves, the transaction fee models, you know, how much do you pay for the trade to go through? All the different custom data implementations, how the fills are done. I won't bore you, but there's hundreds of these different ways that people want customizations built into the project. So our solution, later in 2015, 2016, we really started to focus on a principle of more collaborative design. So we would work with the community to define interfaces, define what the requirements were for their projects, for their models, for their plugin points, and then figure out how that's going to talk with our project. And then we would implement a few of them. So there's no way for our team to implement all of the models that people want, but we would implement 2 or 3 so that they have enough of an example code base to be able to implement the rest. And then we would spend the rest of our time writing documentation and beautiful, elegant HTML pictures documentation. And it's incredibly painful, but it's worth it in the long run. And what we found is that with appropriate documentation, with very clearly defined plug-in points, the community was able to take it from there and start building and implementing much faster than our team ever could. So just recently, following that co-design process, in the last 3 months, we've had about the equivalent of a man-year of engineering contributed to the project. So it's a brokerage implementation for FINOS, Binance, and a new US brokerage called Alpaca. And so those were all things that the community did using our brokerage development guide, some documentation that we wrote to help people implement brokerages. That was about 40 pages, step by step, through every single interface. And to build a brokerage, there was 9 chapters. So it's incredibly painful to write the documentation, but it's worth it, because just in a few months, the community runs off and does all these things. And yeah, it's really awesome, especially as a sort of scrappy startup competing with guys that have 50 or 100 million funding. Like, how can we beat them? We need to kick their ass. How can we think differently? How can we approach these challenges a different way? So this problem, the complexity needs, when people approach a project like this, if it doesn't do everything they need to do, they're afraid they're going to be locked in. If they use it for a little bit and they find a bug, they're afraid they're going to be locked in. So what that actually means, we spent some time to really get to know what people are worried about. And fear of vendor lock-in is actually effectively bugs which are not getting patched. Your business is running on this software, your hedge fund is running on this, and something which is bothering you isn't getting fixed. And the software vendor isn't fixing it. The fear that your features aren't going to be prioritized if there's something that you urgently need, and they've got other priorities. And the same for price hikes. So you start using a platform, and then they triple the price, and you can't run a business anymore with it. So all of those things we're able to effectively eliminate with open source, and the right documentation and coaching of how to use it. And it was actually through really emphasizing that we're not locking you in. And here's a bunch of documentation about how you can use it on your own. Here's how you can take the lean code base and manage it on your own servers. So if tomorrow QuantConnect goes out of business, the open source project's there. In 10 minutes, you can use Docker, deploy your own server, connect to a data subscription, and you're done. You're up and running again. What we're actually able to find was that really increased our adoption. So when people came to the platform, they were no longer afraid of the vendor lock-in. They were no longer afraid of the business going under and all the investment of time and energy building those algorithms being lost. And so counterintuitively, we were actually able to increase our adoption by emphasizing that they're not locked in and providing them as many routes as possible to get out of the community. And that was actually proven just last year. So our main competitor with 50 million funding stopped live trading, and we had a massive migration of their user base into our community. And the first thing they were worried about was, are you going to go out of business or stop live trading? And so we had a massive amount of documentation ready to go, and it was a really perfect timing. So a lot of this won't be new to you guys, but in the same way, opening up the technology gives users the freedom so that they can go and fix those bugs themselves. They can go and build the features they need themselves. And that lock-in dissolves. When you're working with active community members as well, they also get to shape the direction of the project. So where is it going to go, and sharing my code or my voice to be able to contribute to that discussion, which is really cool. So I've got one last slide here. So finally, there was just one other part that was fairly interesting. When we were going open source and trying to figure out how to do it and what to open source, we really had to go back to the two core questions of what is our core value to the users. I'm trying to word this as generically as possible so that it's not about our technology, but so how does QuantConnect help users do algorithmic trading? So for you as a business, what is your core value and how are you helping your clients? So for us, it was getting these algorithms into a live trading environment and making it as easy as possible. They don't want to manage a server. People just want to design something and put it live on their brokerage. All the rest of it is kind of minutiae for them. So we have a massive code base, but a lot of it was actually directed towards managing a web-based coding environment. So we spent about 2 months and we cut it down the middle and we defined how the Lean project would talk to our cloud environment. And we were able to split apart potential competitors, like open sourcing parts of the business where we could be just helping competitors to our company versus helping the community. So what we found was that the Lean project is everything that a user needs to start a hedge fund, to design algorithms, completely independent of QuantConnect. And a lot of our other technology that we didn't open source was the cloud technology. So debugging technology, compiling, running a simulation and managing a cloud. Like none of that is really relative to an individual. So when you go to do that open sourcing, you might want to think about what you're open sourcing and defining clear lines there too. Yeah, thank you very much. If you've got questions, welcome. Cheers.
Mentioned the license, sorry.
Yeah.
You mentioned the license. What about the open source business model that you've got? That's like an open core model. You're selling subscription on top. Was it fully functional? What's the business model you have?
Right. For many years, it was a simple like server licensing. So when you go to Amazon, you'll lease a virtual machine. There's something similar to that for algorithmic trading. But recently, we've started to explore working with the proprietary trading funds and licensing the algorithms that the community's making. So there's over 1 million algorithms and 60,000 smart people who are coding. So now we're trying to connect all those people with funding and banks who might want to recruit them or use their code.
I think I get it. Okay. So rather than a product, you're talking about a community you're trying to monetize.
A marketplace, yeah.
Marketplace. Yeah, Red Hat's done marketplaces not very well necessarily in the past.
Well, that's fine.
Fascinating story. Great presentation.
Thank you.
You had this graph where when you did open source 2014, you had, I think, 8 contributors, or 8 contributors, sorry, 82 contributors. What do you think was the motivation for them to contribute and then start?
In the early days, I don't know. Yeah. In the early days, there was very little motivation. And this is today. But back then, it was maybe 5 people. We really value every single contributor because for every one that's writing code, there's 100 who are just reading and downloading the code. So.
Is it just that like somebody's committing code is not part of your offer? It's more the need to solve the problem. Is that just trying to get what's going in their head?
Yeah, it's actually the people who are contributing now. The project is maybe 10 or 15 man years of work, and a lot of people. It's a relatively new industry, so they go and start the project themselves. They start to build it, and then they quickly realize after a month or two wow, this is like a massive amount of work and I can't do it myself. And so then they go to Google and they try to find other platforms so that they don't have to build it themselves. And oftentimes we're the first result in Google. So they'll come to our website, you know, on GitHub, and they'll go, wow, like, this is everything that I wanted to build, but you've already built it and it's open sourced. So they're just, I think they like to contribute because it's just blown the world up of what they could do now.
So it's like giving something back
Yeah.
to what you use.
Yeah, I don't think there's any direct financial or any other obvious motivation. It's just generosity. Cool. Thank you very much.